Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And there is a quizzical tone to my voice this morning because, for once, I'm not entirely sure in which direction the traffic is going to move. And I think we might be able to have a really sort of fertile and fruitful conversation. Let's start with what we can agree on. The Office of Budget Responsibility and the Institute of Fiscal Studies have fairly roundly rubbished the notion that there will be anything that remotely resembles what Theresa May has elected to call a Brexit dividend. You are perfectly entitled to back your own economic forecasts and insights more enthusiastically than you do the bodies that are responsible for informing Theresa May's government's policy. But I think it's important that you understand that's what you're doing. When Philip Hammond writes a budget or an autumn statement, the forecasts he relies on are the ones that come from the Office of Budget Responsibility. But I fully accept that you may know better.
It means extra money. Significantly more money going into the NHS.
How much?
I'm just about to come on to that. I thought you might want to ask me that question. It means that at the end of 5 years, by 2023-24, there will be £20 billion more in real terms being spent on the NHS. Now, often figures like that, politicians quote figures like that, they don't often mean much to many people. Some people may remember seeing a figure on the side of a bus a while back of 350 million
pounds a week, yeah.
In cash. Well, I can tell you that what I'm announcing will mean that in 2023-24, there will be about £600 million a week in cash, more in cash, going into the NHS.
Paul Johnson, he's in central London. He's the director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Paul, thanks a lot for joining us. So, is it utter tosh?
Well, I mean, the key thing here is that quite a significant promise of extra funding for the NHS. 20 billion at the end of 5 years means that it's getting back close to its long-run average increase after a very tight 8 years. Where's the money going to come from? That we don't know. One thing we do know is it's not going to come from something called a Brexit dividend.
Well, the Prime Minister says it is.
Well, it can't because there isn't one. I mean, for two reasons. One is a simple bit of arithmetic, which is that if you look through to 2023, because of the way we're paying the Brexit divorce bill and because of the promises the government's already made to farmers and others that will carry on spending money that the EU spends in the UK, there is literally no money. The second and even more important point is that the government has already accepted that because the economy will be hit by Brexit, that there'll be a negative effect on the public finances. There'll actually be at least £15 billion a year less to spend as a result of the Brexit vote. So, in the end, this money will come from higher taxes or higher borrowing. There is not a Brexit dividend there for it to be paid with.
No forecasts are perfect, and none of them ever come true, but you go with the best available. And if you think that your forecasts are better than the ones that the government rely on, then that's great. You're probably not being paid enough. So there is no Brexit dividend, according to every reputable economic forecast and every credible economist. We all know this, okay? Even the most fully paid up Brextremists know this. Theresa May certainly knows this. The numbers are there. This isn't politics. This is just counting. So what was she doing when she announced this weekend an injection of cash, a relatively large injection of cash, into the NHS, cash which they've spent 8 years telling us they didn't have? The absence of which cash was pretty much the rationale for the entire austerity programme of George Osborne, a programme defended on the stump and in the House by politicians like Theresa May, and a programme largely inherited by her and Philip Hammond. So I almost need to get a pen. Just wait there a second. There we go. So, number one, there is no Brexit dividend, things upon which we can all agree. That's how we usually start the week, and just a question of how quickly it all falls apart. So, number one, there is no Brexit dividend. That's fine. Number two, more cash for the NHS is absolutely great. Albeit that what they're essentially doing is spending less money than Labour did until 2010 in order to hopefully undo some of the damage that they have done since 2010. But more cash for the NHS, unalloyed good. There is no Brexit dividend, unchallengeable fact. Number 3, where will the money come from? Well, there are only 2 answers to that question, unless the government are buying lottery tickets every week, which, frankly, I wouldn't put past this lot. There are only 2 answers to that. Do you think they are buying lottery tickets every week? Good grief. Anyway, there are only 2 answers to that question. And it would have to be Euro millions, and they'd have to win it several times to make a dent in the kind of budgets that we're talking about here. They'd have to win it every week, actually, wouldn't they? With massive rollovers. You can't have a massive rollover every week, because if you had a massive rollover last week and you won it, there wouldn't be a rollover this week. Stick with me for the economics, guys. Seriously, I'm all over this. So number 3, where will the money come from? Answer: tax rises, or I think the Telegraph of all places today calls it a stealth tax, which will involve a freezing of personal tax thresholds. I mean, even that's a little bit dodgy, because that hinges on the notion that our wages are going to go up and the tax thresholds won't, so we'll end up paying more tax in each threshold. But again, there's not a lot of evidence that our wages are going to go up. But anyway, tax rises and or government borrowing. Government borrowing being, if you had to pick a principle, and I use the word very advisedly, but if you had to pick a principle upon which David Cameron and George Osborne built their political project, it would be the fact that we're not going to do any more borrowing. So they've kind of torn all of that up. Tax rises and or borrowing. So that's point 3. Are you still with me at the back? Let me recap. Point 1, there is no Brexit dividend. Point 2, more cash for the NHS. You would be a fool to criticise, even if you're not happy with point 3, which is the only way they can raise this money is by asking us all to pay a bit more tax and or borrowing more money as the government. So those are the 3 points. Now, where are we politically on this? Why has she done something that has so clearly been built upon an absolute farrago of nonsense and deception? Answer: well, Brexit's getting ever closer. Do you remember something I said to you last week or the week before, when Boris Johnson tried to float the boat that the Irish border was a relatively trivial part of Brexit negotiations? Do you remember that? And I said to you that what you'll find now is the furiously hard-of-thinking wing of the Brexit movement, your kind of Andrea Leadsom, Nadine Dorries type characters. They will now start repeating this nonsense that they don't really understand, because it just allows them not to go full goldfish. This is what the Brexit hardcore need now. What Boris Johnson gives them occasionally is a way to avoid going full goldfish. And by full goldfish, what I mean is this isn't going to work on the radio, is it? I might do it anyway. What I mean is this. So the goldfish mouth just goes... they have nothing to say. So you say something to them about what on earth are you going to do about the Irish border, you absolute plank, and they go... And Boris Johnson gives them something to avoid going full goldfish. In this case, well, the Irish border is trivial. And I said to you a couple of weeks ago, that will be their latest fig leaf. That is what they use to avoid going full goldfish. So what I think is about to happen, and I am like you, just trying to make sense of a political landscape, the Prime Minister's own Twitter account posits the lie, the blatant lie that there's going to be a Brexit dividend. That's pretty scary. That's sort of sub-Trumpian soundbitery at its ugliest and most cynical. But this is what she knows. She knows that the hardcore Brexiters, as reality bites and their vision falls apart, they need something to avoid going full goldfish. She's got to give them something that helps them avoid going full goldfish. So in the coming weeks, we're probably going to find that it will be almost impossible to operate post-Brexit without staying in some way under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. Allow me a moment now to express a degree of professional pride that nobody who listens to this programme on a regular basis can be remotely surprised by any of what is about to happen. You can be furious because you thought I was wrong, but you can't be surprised. So we're going to have to stay under the auspices pretty much of the ECJ. I don't personally see at the moment how we're going to be able to avoid membership, de facto retention of membership of the customs union and or the single market, because to leave either or both of those would be economic suicide on a scale that I don't think any government would actually be able to countenance. So they're going to start delivering to the Brexit hardcore. A succession of what they'll call concessions, but which you and I know are absolutely inevitable recognitions of reality. And the Brexit hardcore are going to pretty much wave goodbye to all the nonsense that they've been spouting for the last 2.5 to 3 years. And that leaves them looking like goldfish. So when you say, well, what happened to taking back control? And then you say, well, hang on a minute, I thought they needed us more than we needed them. And then you say, well, hang on, what about all these trade deals that Liam Fox was supposed to have got sorted by now? So they're going full goldfish on pretty much every imaginable front. What have they got to put in place of going full goldfish? The claim, absolutely bogus claim. Everybody knows it's a bogus claim. Theresa May can be supremely confident that someone like Boris Johnson isn't going to worry about telling blatant lies because he's been doing it for his entire career. So Boris Johnson will go on the telly or go on the stump or go on the radio or wherever else he's offered a warm welcome. And he'll claim that whatever happens next was worth it because we're getting the Brexit dividend for the NHS. And even the most supine of journalists today are pointing out the fraudulence of that position. But it doesn't matter because it's not just the key Brexit campaigners that need help in avoiding going full goldfish. It's all the people who are still refusing to admit that they were conned. So I welcome this injection of cash into the NHS, albeit that it works out roughly half of what we saw Labour do between 1997 and 2010. I hope that it is enough to undo at least some of the damage that this government has visited upon the single most valuable and important institution this country has ever or will ever create. And I personally welcome the notion that the money will come from tax rises and government borrowing, because in a logical universe, where I still manage to keep at least one foot, in a logical universe, it can't come from anywhere else. So great. I don't, however, think we should let them get away with lying to you on quite this scale. So unless you are a goldfish, you know that that is pretty much textbook, incontrovertible analysis of what's going on. Which leads us to the question of what question I should ask you this morning. I suppose we should start with pick holes in what I've said. That's always fun. 0345 6060 973. Bearing in mind that I have acknowledged that your economic expertise may far exceed that of both the Institute of Fiscal Studies and the Office of Budgetary Responsibility, in which case the government should be using your forecasts, of course, rather than the OBRs and the IFSs. But if we accept that, there is no Brexit dividend, more cash for the NHS is a good thing, and it will come from tax rises and government borrowing, I think I've got two questions for you. Number one, please give me a ring if you're a goldfish. 0345 6060 973. And number two, what do you think? Because I'm prepared, given that the alternative is to chop off both our legs, I think this counts as a hoppity-hop type scenario this morning. I think this is... Problem is, you can't call it a silver lining because we would actually have more money, about £15 billion a year more, if we didn't Brexit, all of which could have been put into the NHS by an honest Prime Minister. But if you accept that this Prime Minister is so banjaxed and so tied in knots by the infighting in her own party and her own failure to understand some of the intricacies of European Union law and indeed the Good Friday Agreement, if you accept all of that and you look at what might happen, this is where I need your help. Because I'm now reaching a position where I'm thinking, well, now I know what might happen. Now I know just how mad people like Jacob Rees-Mogg are as they move significant swathes of their own investment fund to Dublin so that they can retain EU passporting rights while telling plebs like you and me that leaving the European Union is a good thing. Now that you just see, now you see how absolutely stark the con is, I'm beginning to think that anything less than oblivion is good. So I'm beginning to see this investment in the NHS as a good thing, while simultaneously understanding that it's completely bogus and fraudulent. Because what's the alternative? To carry on with all the nonsense, to carry on with the con, to carry on with the utterly unnecessary self-inflicted national harm, and not give lots of money to the NHS via tax rises and borrowing. Does that mean I've lost the plot? And there's your starter for 10. My lips are a bit itchy, actually. We might need to find another sounder. I can't keep doing it myself. But we now know. We saw it first with Boris Johnson's claim that the Irish border was a triviality. A absolutely barefaced lie, but it's designed to stop them from going full goldfish, from actually just having to look into the television camera or phone up a radio programme like this, if we're talking about punters as opposed to professionals, and just feel their entire position fall apart and their mouth just... The mouth just does that. So Theresa May has given them something that they're going to call the Brexit dividend to protect them from going full goldfish when they're asked why we haven't got more control, we're poorer, we haven't got any of the things they promised us that we would have. And I just want to know how you feel about that, because I'm very, very conflicted. I like the idea of more money going into the NHS. Coming from, it's a classic Labour Party policy, isn't it? More borrowing and more taxes. It's magic money tree stuff. But I struggle with the hypocrisy of a Conservative government introducing it when a Labour opposition suggested it, they got shot down in flames by presumably a lot of the people who'll be applauding the Conservative government for doing this. And when I say applauding, I mean the honest people who aren't pretending that there's any such thing as a Brexit dividend. Bob is in the city. Bob, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Bob.
Two things here. First of all, I think the numbers speak for themselves. Their own figures show that we're going to be in a worse situation.
The government's own figures.
The government's own figures
Yes.
show that we are going to be in a worse position going through each of their possible scenarios. Therefore, there is no surplus money.
Yes, but you don't believe hard enough, Bob.
Yeah, I know. I've been watching Nigel and Aaron, and I'm almost there, but not quite.
Okay.
So the key thing here is it is well known what the costs are, and just trying to fool people again is poor, is very poor. But the key thing I think here is that there's a very important vote in the Commons in the middle of the week, where Dominic Grieve and the other rebels have stated that we need this meaningful vote when Theresa May comes back from Brussels with a deal. And I think that is the most important issue of the moment.
It is, but don't. I mean, we'll be all over it like a rash as it looms ever closer, and you can tell that people are spooked because of the disgusting treatment that Dominic Grieve is receiving from the usual suspects in the media, and some actually of his own slightly unhinged backbenchers. But this is significant. I mean, an injection of. I know it's a slightly nebulous figure, but £20 billion increase in NHS spending is the big story of the day. And I appreciate you think it might be a distraction from what's happening in Parliament later in the week, but that is what I want to talk about today.
Okay, I think it's wonderful. I think the fact that we're getting 3.4% per annum?
Yes. Yeah, just roughly half of what I think Labour invested in the NHS for all, if not most, if not all of the years between 97 and 2010.
Yeah, and the commentary coming out of the NHS yesterday showed that this is just about enough money to keep them ticking over. It is not going to improve things vastly, and it is a lot less than they need. I think they need over 5% to actually make improvement. So it is the bare minimum that the government needs to do to stop the NHS from collapse. Having said that, it's great that they're giving any money at all.
Can we challenge the goldfish theory, do you think? Or have I forgive me for sounding conceited, but have I completely nailed this morning?
I don't think so. I even saw a tweet this morning from Nigel Farage saying that she should have been honest. We're going to have to put up tax. We're going to have to borrow money. Now, when that happens...
That was irony. That's a pot calling a kettle black, isn't it?
Nigel always stands at the...
No, I don't know. Let's talk about politics, not about... I don't know what the word would be, but it's probably not suitable for repetition on a family programme. With the idea of what is Theresa May playing at? Everybody with a functioning intellect. And there you go, there's the phrase I want. I want to talk about people and issues that demand a functioning intellect rather than, sort of snake oil and deception. So everybody with a functioning intellect can see that there is no Brexit dividend. Even if at some point, hence you could argue that the numbers have been crunched and it turns out we are better off. That's going to be 20, 30 years hence. It's not going to happen, but we can pretend that it might. So there is no Brexit dividend. Theresa May, for all her failings, hasn't actually appeared thus far to be as dishonest as some of her cabinet members like Boris Johnson. So she knows there's no Brexit dividend. Philip Hammond certainly knows. I'd love to know what's going on in his mind at the moment. So what do you think she's playing at in the context of Brexit by claiming that this money that she's giving to the NHS is somehow going to come from a £15 billion a year deficit? What's she up to politically?
The only thing I can come up with is that she's trying to appease Boris, in that he did come out, and I can't remember exactly when, but he did say there is some validity to the 350 million. And just to be able to say, well, yeah, there is some money coming back from our lack of contribution or a lack of net contribution, does perhaps try and align herself a little bit more with Boris.
So that he can go out and say, we got this, and please don't look at the numbers, please don't look behind the curtain, please ignore the old man pulling all the levers and pushing all the buttons. We have got a Brexit dividend. So it's a fig leaf. It's a way of helping them avoid going full goldfish.
I think so, and I think it helps them to give a single view across that cabinet, which is falling apart, as we know.
And the honourable backbenchers like Sarah Wollaston, who I think chairs the Health Select Committee, describing the dividend as completely pie in the sky. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. I think we probably should guard against sounding conceit, or I should. So give me another analysis of what Theresa May has done. You can't, I'm afraid, work on the principle that we're going to be better off as a result of this, because last week those people were telling us we were definitely going to be worse off in the short term, but they knew that all along. So you can't pivot with the vaguest semblance of honesty from saying, no, we are going to be worse off, but I knew that all along, I just never mentioned it in the run-up to the vote, to now saying, oh, we're definitely going to be better off. Do you see what I mean? These are the kind of contradictions and hypocrisies that lie at the heart of all these discussions. But is there an explanation of Theresa May's political manoeuvring that avoids the JOB full goldfish theory? Ashley is in Bromley. Ashley, what would you like to say?
Hello, I've got a slightly different take, and it's something I just think interesting, but I think we're going to find the public are being put in a very precarious position, because we do have this very lovely NHS.
Sort your phone out, Ashley, will you, mate? I don't know what you're doing at the moment, but just keep it steady in one place and near your mouth. Are you there? He's gone. No, I thought that sounded dodgy. OK, 0345. Is he back, Ashley? Quickly, we're running out of time. What would you like to say?
Can you hear me now?
That's a lot better, yeah. Carry on.
No problem. I think that the public are going to be put in a predicament. There's this whole idea that we love the NHS, and that's brilliant, but now we're going to be asked to put the cash up for it.
Yes.
I know that Jeremy Corbyn isn't seen as the kind of socialism or Labour Party that we'll see, but I think when the kind of figures that are going to be put out with regards to taxation go to Conservatives and Labour voters, that you may see a revolt by...
Phone line, mate. I'm sorry, it's not your fault. We may try and get you back up after the news. It's the closest I ever come, to losing my temper on air. And it's nobody's fault, apparently. I don't understand why in recent weeks the ability to have a clear phone line from Bromley... Nick always says we can get a man on the moon, but we can't get a clear phone line from Bromley. We shall find out. Phone lines are open, albeit that they're a little bit polluted. 0345 6060 973. I do want to give Ashley another crack of the whip. Tony in Woodford, I'll be with you first after the news. I want another analysis, actually. It's one of those mornings where I'm busy patting myself on the back for unravelling everything and getting it all bang on the money. But, of course, I almost certainly haven't. Whether it's a small flaw in my theory or whether it's a gaping hole, please feel free to point it out. Goldfish especially welcome. 0345 6060 973. There is no Brexit dividend. Literally nobody thinks there is a Brexit dividend, genuinely. OK? I saw Andrea Leadsom tweeting, but with Andrea Leadsom, you don't know whether she's completely failed to understand the issue or whether she's still backing artisan jams. The point is, nobody credible thinks there is a Brexit dividend. Not even the right-wing media are pretending today that there's a Brexit dividend. The Daily Telegraph talks about a stealth tax. The Daily Mail inevitably starts talking about NHS waste. Middle-class taxes is the phrase that they use. Everybody knows that this money is going to be coming from taxation and borrowing. hardcore Brexiters pretend that they don't understand that. Theresa May is not a hardcore Brexiter. So what are this dreadful new word, what are the optics of what she's done? You tell me, politically, in terms of political tactics, given you my reading of it, it's a way to help people like Boris Johnson and more importantly, people who voted for this, who are going to discover in the next few months that none of the things they thought were possible are possible. It gives them something that helps them avoid going full goldfish in front of their friends and family. And in the case of Boris Johnson, in front of the television cameras. 0345 6060 973. If you want to pick a hole in or indeed drive a coach and horses through, that starter for 10. I'm James, please stop. I'm at work, and every time you do an impression of a goldfish on the radio, I burst out laughing. Well, it depends where you're working. Obviously, if you're an undertaker, I'm terribly sorry. We are discussing Theresa May's announcement of extra money for the NHS. When I say extra money, they're essentially reversing some of the cuts that her party, the party in which she served as Home Secretary, one of the great officers of state for 6 years. You just say these things out loud sometimes, and you even take yourself by surprise. Oh, well done for undoing some of the damage that the government that you served as Home Secretary under has done for the best part of this decade. But it's still better than it not happening at all. This is the point that, people who really don't have a dog in the race anymore in terms of party politics, this is the kind of thing we have to cling to now. So then you look at the political tactics. What's she actually up to? There is no Brexit dividend. Everybody knows that, not least the Conservative chair of the Health Select Committee, not least the head of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, not least the Office for Budget Responsibility on which all government spending is predicated. So there is no Brexit dividend. Why is she pretending that there is? 0345 6060 973. Alan is in Bedford. Alan, what would you like to say?
Hello.
Hello, Alan.
I've been in touch with my MP for the past 3 months. I've exchanged emails. I've gone to his surgery. And I am becoming completely convinced that there is a genuine attempt being made to walk the tightrope between satisfying the will of the people and avoiding the nation going into a disaster. I've sent a letter where I went through step by step saying what I would do in a change management program and what decisions would need to be made. And he came back basically saying, well, he didn't say that there was any benefits to be had. He just said that there was a vote, it was genuine, and that we have to...
Except it wasn't genuine, was it? I mean, we all know.
Well, of course.
Whichever side you were on, we knew nothing. Speaking solely for myself, I was supremely unqualified to cast a vote in that referendum. I didn't even know what a just-in-time supply chain was.
And I believe all of those things. I believe all of those things, James. But the point is that the referendum was held, and in order to turn it over, and I'm speaking more or less for my MP.
Of course.
In order to turn it over, then you need to tell 52% of the people who voted of the electorate that what they did was wrong. And the government and even MPs have been hoodwinked into believing...
They can't do it. They can't turn around and say you were conned, because the consequences would be too big to cope with.
Yeah.
And Theresa May knows it. It's true. Boris Johnson knows it's true, because he was one of the biggest con men. He just never really thought he'd win. So they have to try... You see, this is what's so terrifying. This is why when she comes out with stuff about... I don't know if you saw it this weekend, about how Parliament cannot be allowed to tie the government's hands. Now, either I have to send back my politics A-level certificate, or she's completely wrong about how the constitution of this country operates, because Parliament exists entirely to put checks and balances on the government.
It doesn't matter. They'll do anything to try and get it through. And
in any way, shape or form.
Yes, yeah, and it seems that truth and honesty doesn't matter. You just say what will be believed by enough people to be able to push it on to the next step.
And by believed by enough people, we're talking about giving them something that allows them to kid themselves that what they voted for was plausible and has in some sense happened, and that's where the full goldfish theory comes in.
That's where I think that's where I am as well.
So she, very cynically, is telling quite a large pork pie in the hope that it's a big enough pork pie to keep the jaws of Boris Johnson and co busy while she gets on with the business of delivering the least bad Brexit, which would be the least bad Brexit would be the Brexit that most resembles being in the European Union.
it's a big enough lie to get everybody talking about it while they try and manoeuvre in the background to take the next step, which is hopefully to get through the next week or two. And then, as I think you suggested earlier, when it gets into negotiations with the EU again, it's going to be, are we going to be able to negotiate a deal? And probably the only way they will is if they go into some form of single market and customs union. And when they come to that point, then there might be another big step, which is, can we carry everyone along with this, or are we going to have to go for a people's vote? Or,
so British politics, British government at the moment is dedicated to minimising the self-inflicted damage of Brexit while simultaneously helping the people responsible for conning the country into pursuing Brexit to retain some sort of credibility and dignity.
I would agree with that, because you can guess what side of the argument I'm on.
Right, yeah, but I can, although with the caveat that none of us were qualified to cast a vote in that referendum. It's not even sides of an argument anymore, is it? Because everything we've said today is pretty close to being an incontrovertible fact. You know, the forecasts, such as they are unanimous. The Brexit dividend is a unicorn. In the extreme. The money for the NHS is something that everybody should welcome, but to pretend that it's not coming from tax rises and government borrowing is absurd. And if you call yourself a Conservative, a pro-Brexit Conservative, you spent the entire general election campaign last year arguing against more borrowing or higher taxes. So we are literally, did anyone write that down, that line about that's what we're doing? We've got a government that's dedicated to minimising the utterly unnecessary self-inflicted damage of Brexit while allowing the con men responsible for selling Brexit to the country to retain some form of dignity or credibility. Because if Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg feel that they're going to lose all of their dignity and credibility, they will happily throw the country under the bus in order to protect their own sullied, tarnished reputations. Holy moly.
I would put it slightly differently. I think a lot of what you said is true, but the reason is not really to give those people credibility, although that's a side effect. What we're doing is we're trying to respect the result of a football match. You know, and whether there were any fouls or anything like that in the actual game, this side won. So they've got to get something for it.
Yes, I mean, that would also be fair, I think, although in the terms of what she's doing to the troublemakers in her own cabinet, it's closer to the dignity credibility argument. Also, I don't know anymore how many people, if they really knew what was going to happen, how many people would still put their hands up in private. I mean, in public you kind of have to. I think opinion polls are closer to public than private, oddly. How many people would still put their hands up and say, yeah, no, I absolutely keep those frying pans flying at my face. This is exactly what I knew I was voting for. Because you just need to look at the pivots that they undertake now, the way they can go in a week from saying that, well, look, in the space of 2 years, you go from saying we'll be better off, or there'll be no negative impact whatsoever, it's all Project Fear. And then they move to saying, oh, yeah, no, there is obviously going to be some negative impact. But I knew that all along, and I'm all for it. It will be short term. That's the word. That was the other, avoiding going full goldfish. Yes, there will, of course, be some economic downturn. It's not by accident that we've suddenly ended up having, I think, the highest inflation and the lowest growth out of all comparable economies in the world. But they now claim that they knew that all along, and the fig leaf becomes short-term. It's going to be short-term. No evidence whatsoever that it's going to be short-term at all, but it allows you to stop going full goldfish. And then in the space of a week, when she makes the NHS announcement, you go from saying, well, of course there's going to be some economic damage in the short term, to claiming that suddenly there's going to be a Brexit dividend immediately. It's absurd even to try to pin down truth in that three-way thing, from X to Y and back to X again in the space of 2 years, and from Y to X in the space of 2 hours on a Sunday morning. 10:43 is the time. Thank you, Alan. Tony is in Woodford. Tony, what's going on?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
I would just want to ask, is there any chance that you could do an interview with Theresa May like you did with IBS?
You'd have to ask them, I'm afraid. I gather that the interviews now are confined to people that have worked at Downing Street and Andrew Marr.
Right. Well, James, what I wanted to say was I just think that, you know, that Theresa May is deceiving the public once again.
Yes.
You know, why...
Except she's not, though, is she? She's not deceiving the public anymore, Tony. That's the one silver lining that we can take away from this, because unless you are a fully paid-up goldfish, you're not deceived.
Let us know what taxes are coming. What's wrong with that? We've got to pay for it one way or the other. So why doesn't she just be upfront with us?
Well, you know why. Because she's a Conservative Prime Minister, and their whole credo is supposed to be low borrowing, low tax. But in order to keep the goldfish happy, she's had to give them some sort of fig leaf, and that fig leaf involves doing the opposite of what she's supposed to stand for with regard to taxation and borrowing. And that's why that's the most cheery contribution we've had so far, the idea that actually we're not swallowing it. I mean, most people haven't swallowed it all along, but she's not deceiving the public. We haven't had one call yet from somebody who actually thinks that she's telling the truth.
Yeah, but she's not actually giving them an account of being absolutely honest, is she? No one's kind of pushing her. Where's
no, but you just want, mate, look, you know how. To be fair, if you were Prime Minister, if you were Theresa May, would you come on this show and be interviewed by me?
If I had honesty and integrity, yes, I would.
That's not what I asked. I asked if you were Theresa May, would you come on this show and be interviewed by me?
No, I wouldn't. A million miles.
They don't pay these ex-Daily Mail advisors for nothing, you know, mate. It's 10:45. Well, given that nobody sensible, and I think that I can keep using that phrase with Andrea Leadsom being the only person I can find who's publicly arguing that there is actually a Brexit dividend. Publicly arguing, rather than just claiming. Theresa May's, I mean, it's come to something, hasn't it, when the Prime Minister of this country can put something in the public arena that she knows isn't true. She knows it's not true, because the budget that her own Chancellor will write depends upon the economic forecasting of the Office of Budget Responsibility. And they reckon we're going to be 15 billion quid a year in the hole after Brexit. And yet she spent yesterday, and there's a speech later today, somehow arguing that we're going to be better off, this phrase Brexit dividend. If you think of it as a membership fee for a club, no, it's a membership fee that allows you to trade, right? And let's say the fee is 250 quid a year, and the trade that you do as a result of being a member of the club is worth £2,000 a year, just to keep the figures low, right? So you make, let's say, profit of £2,000 a year on the trade that you do. So I pay 250 quid a year to go to the car boot sale, right? And I make a profit over the course of the year of £2,000. I only go once a month. 250 quid, it's just over a tenner a time, just over 20 quid a time. So you pay to go to the car. This is Brexit as a car boot sale. Right, pay attention. So I pay £250 a year, £240 a year. Let's keep it simple, because it's 20 quid a month, right? So I pay £20 a month to go to the car boot sale, and that comes in at £240 a year. Now, after I have deducted my costs, I make a profit every year of about £2,000, okay? Do you know what the car boot sale dividend is? The car boot sale dividend is me not going to the car boot sale anymore and keeping the 240 quid. That's my car boot sale dividend. So I'm now going to take that 240 quid and put it into health insurance. This is Brexit dividend in a car boot sale shaped nutshell. So I've got that 240 quid that I'm currently spending on car boot sale subs, and I'm not spending it on car boot sale subs anymore because I'm not doing any more car boot sales, and I've got that £240. Look, it's here. I've got it here. You can't tell me it doesn't exist. It's here. Ha-ha. And I'm going to spend it on health insurance in case I get poorly. Everyone's a winner. Yeah, but what about the £2,000 that you've had coming in every year as a result of doing the car? Shush! Shush, goldfish, unicorns, fish, passports. What about the 2,000? Because you're going to be 1,760 quid a year worse off, mate. Well, who do you think you are? The head of the Institute for Fiscal Studies? You literally, seriously, £2,000 minus 240 is 1,760 quid. You're going to be 1,760 quid worse off if you stop doing the car boot sales. Oh. Yeah. Well, can't really put it. I'm just going to say car boot sale dividend until the interviewer stops asking me difficult questions. Car boot sale dividend. Ian is in Beaconsfield. Ian, what would you like to say?
Oh, James, I tell you what, if I'm a goldfish, that makes you a giant carp, I have to say, because,
Very strong, Ian.
Well, not really. Come on. You know, every day you come on and you spout all these words like lies and, you know, and morons and et cetera, et
Don't
cetera.
use the word moron, actually. It's very much a word I studiously avoid.
Not far off. I mean,
Although
some of the stuff you say is
I am,
very-
if you insist, I am prepared to make an exception in your case. But carry on.
Okay, so we give 350 million. You've just gone through all the figures. You know, the net figure's probably 200 million. The remaining 150 million goes to various scientific projects and farming and all lots of kickback to people who support the EU and further their agenda. So,
For example?
when we know,
For example?
well, I just said like farming, scientific research, and various.
But for example, who gets kickbacks?
Well, people who support the EU. Most of the money.
The farming community came out quite strongly against it, despite the advice of the NFU. So who gets the kickbacks that supports the EU?
Well, that's my belief. But
We're not talking about beliefs, are we? We're talking about fact. We are at the point you just made about kickbacks and the EU support. So who are you talking about,
Ian? I
Ian?
think a lot of the money is. But anyway.
But
so
who are you talking
150
about?
million.
Ian, who are you talking about?
Oh, you're doing it again, aren't you? You're not
Yeah,
going
I
to
know,
make my
asking
point.
questions and insisting you back up your quotes, beliefs and
Well-
quotes. But rest assured, I'm not going to call you a moron. So what are you talking about when you
That's
describe
my belief. But anyway,
institutions?
so
Institutions that
we've got a
get
net figure of
kickbacks?
200 million.
Institutions that
We've
get
got a net
kickbacks,
figure-
Ian.
James, you don't want to make people, you know, express their opinions on your show.
I'm
do
repeating
you?
your
So if
words
someone
back to
comes
you.
on-
I'm repeating your words back to you and asking you to explain yourself. You can say I can't, and then we'll
I
carry
believe
on.
that money that comes back,
Yes.
I've said in the past, is kickbacks to people who support the EU.
For
and further their
example?
agenda, right? That's just my opinion.
For
You know,
example?
talk a bit more and you can do whatever you like.
For
I'm
example?
not going to give any examples because I'd like to get to my point.
Okay, don't
see?
give me any examples, but carry on. You're definitely
Yeah,
not
okay,
a
then.
moron.
That's my opinion. Okay, yeah, you call me what you like. That's your defence mechanism, isn't it?
No, you're definitely not a moron.
When they disagree with you.
You're definitely not. We haven't disagreed yet. You've told me some beliefs, and then we both agreed that you can't back them up. What have we disagreed about?
Right, okay. So we have 350 million at our disposal. Now, if the government at the time decides to continue to fund all those projects, then the net figure will remain at 200 million or thereabouts.
What
debatable,
project?
Whatever.
What project?
Well, God, James, can I make my point?
Yes, if you just have to back up the words that you use, what projects?
Look, I'm not an expert on what this money funds. I know.
So
that
what are the projects? Just give me one project that you're talking about. One project.
All sorts of stuff. It
Well,
goes
one
to
then.
medical research. It goes to community projects.
So
it
you
goes
want to cut
farming,
medical
it goes to-
research?
Sorry?
You want to cut medical research?
No, I didn't say that, did I?
Well, you
said that.
did. You said if we don't fund these projects, and I said what projects, and you said medical research, and I said so now you don't want to fund medical research.
But I didn't. Yeah, but I'm not saying that at all.
So
I
what
said
are
the
you
government
saying,
of the
Ian?
day at the time
What are you saying?
has the. Well, if you let me talk, I can say it.
But I need to clarify so that I can understand what you're saying. You just said that we won't fund these projects. I said what projects? You said medical
I didn't
research.
say we won't fund them.
You did, mate.
I said. See, this is your tactic, isn't it? Trying
Yes,
to
it
confuse
is.
you.
Repeating
Right.
back your own words to you and asking you to
Start again.
explain them.
Do you want me to start again?
Yes.
Right, okay, 350 million, approximately 150 million debatable, comes back in various projects, assorted projects. The government of the
For
day
example?
has the option to... Oh, there you go again.
Yes, well, we've started again, so now you can tell me what the projects are.
Oh, James, you are so...
Oh, Ian, come on, mate. It's really easy. Here's the thing, right? If I said, Ian, there's all these projects, and you said, what projects, I would tell you.
Do you think people buy this tactic? Do you think people don't realise what you're doing?
What am I doing, Ian?
Well, you're trying to humiliate and bully your caller.
No, I'm not, Ian. I'm asking you to explain your own words.
Coercing, as far as I'm...
So what projects, mate?
there you go again.
Asking you
You're
to
gonna let me
explain
make
your
my
own
point,
words.
Tom?
But when you say, am I going to let you finish, do you mean I'm going to let you talk
Well, I haven't got to the point yet.
in a
have I?
way that you can't explain, and I'm not going to
What
challenge
you
you in
did
any way?
Is you continue to
No, I
interrupt-
will do that, actually. I'm just going to be
You try
quiet.
and
I'm going to be
digress,
quiet now, so
try
you
and
fill your
confuse
boots.
the
Go.
issue. Right, so 350 minus 150, they have the option to continue all those projects with that money or not to. But if they decide not to, then we have £350 million. It's there. You know, when we leave, it's there, basically. Doesn't matter what the economy does. If we stayed in, they would have to find that money anyway. So that money is then available. So it's not fictitious, it's real. Okay, so we have that money, basically, to choose to invest in the NHS. So it's not fictitious, so that makes you a giant carp if I'm a goldfish. You just spout the same stuff every day. You know, it's not a lie. It absolutely isn't a lie. So there is money available. Now, whether they can cover the whole bill with that 350 million or not is not the point. The point is that we will have an enormous amount of money that at the moment does us no good because it goes off to the EU. Some of it comes back in to support EU-funded projects, which further their agenda, in my opinion, and I'm not going to prove it. And that's the point. It's not fictitious. Over to you. Go on, James.
I'm still listening.
Okay, well, that's my point. So you finally let me make it. But, you know, it's ridiculous. It's painful listening to you sometimes on the show because you're not a professional at all. You don't
It's
let
optional.
people make their points.
Well, you've made your
Sorry?
point now.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
So I do let people make their points.
Eventually.
Okay, so now what are the projects that we're not going to pay for anymore?
Confuse them.
Ian, what are the projects that we're not going to pay for anymore?
Yeah, you go again.
Well, could you just tell me now?
Well, some of them are scientific, some of them are community projects.
So but just give me some examples, mate.
Farming, it goes to all sorts of stuff. Well, I don't have to give you examples.
I think
no,
you don't. Of course you don't have to, but if you don't want to sound ridiculous, you do.
But, no, not at all. I don't sound
So just one example?
I only sound
No?
ridiculous.
Nothing?
Gullible.
Come on.
Follow you and believe.
Ian?
What?
Anything?
What?
Anything?
James, I'm going to go to...
The projects? Okay, mate. Have a great day. You're definitely not a moron. Mark's in Nottingham. Mark, what would you like to say?
Just quickly, James, I'm treating gently. This is an alternative view with what Theresa May's doing. It's all about the potential of an election shortly. So loads of money into the NHS. It shores up the already 3 to 7% lead by the Tories in the opinion polls. And then if she won the election, then she could perhaps do what she wants to do with Brexit rather than being held to...
when would the election be, do you think?
Well, it could be in the summer. Could be after this week or next week's vote on the amendment that they've got coming up. You know, and then the electorate already see the fact that the Tories are saying they're going to put 20 billion into the NHS, and that will add 1 or 2% to their lead. You never know.
I think you're probably right. No one's going to say we don't want more money for the NHS.
Exactly. And
but people are saying today, where's it going to come from?
Yeah, but people don't really matter. People don't really bother about where it's going to come to.
Well, Ian does. You know? You just heard Ian. He knows where it's going to come from. We're going to save it by not spending stuff on stuff.
Well, we know. We know it's going to come from borrowing. It's going to come from increased taxes.
No, it's not. You heard him. It's going to come from projects.
Yeah, but, you know, some people just believe what they're told, don't they?
Well, that, I'm afraid, is something that no one can argue with. Mark, thank you very much. Shall we carry on with this a little bit longer? We found one goldfish. There might be a few more out there. I'm going to rebait my hook. The time now is 11 o'clock. I think we'll throw the hook into the water. Actually, we won't. We're looking for serious analyses of the so-called Brexit dividend and what we think Theresa May is up to, given that, I suppose I now have to add an almost everybody can see that there is no such thing. I'd liked a little bit longer with the last caller there. Maybe we shouldn't have kept Ian on for quite so long. They'd probably have been grateful to us. But the idea that it's an election ploy, I don't quite get that at the moment, although I'd put nothing past them. In the short term, this notion of a Brexit dividend is clearly to allow people who can't really say anything else when you say what's happening, what's going on. They can say, there is a Brexit dividend and it's going to the NHS. And then you point out the car boot analogy, which is everybody credible has crunched the numbers and said, well, if we don't pay our membership fee of this club, then our trade will be so badly affected that we will be worse off. 15 billion being the outer limit or the figure that the OBR has put in place. So it is exactly like paying your £20 a month to do a car boot sale, making a profit of £2,000 or 1,760 once you've paid your subs, and then saying, I'm not doing the car boot sale anymore, I'm £240 a year better off. That's it. I mean, there is no quibbling with that. It's that simple. Obviously, the numbers are going to be slightly different. So Theresa May knows this, Philip Hammond knows this, everybody knows this, even Boris Johnson knows this. So why are they doing it? Answer, perhaps they're just hoping that there's enough people out there who will sort of just say stuff that they don't really understand or believe and reach for the soundbite. And I'm afraid in the current zeitgeist of politics on both sides of the Atlantic, you could perhaps understand why they'd backed that horse. John's in Reading. John, what's going on?
You're right, James. How you doing, mate?
Oh, good, mate. What's on your mind?
My mind is, I reckon it's all going to come from national insurance contribution. So if you allow me to give you a little backstory, about a year or so ago, they put off the national insurance contribution increase because it would harm people and it would affect people. And there was a lot of the campaign from the newspapers. So what the newspapers are going to do... Sorry, mate, I'm just going to go around the back. My mate's just turned off his hedge car.
He's done what?
Sorry, mate, don't worry.
No, I do. I want to know. Answer the question. What is it?
Shut up, God.
Carry on.
So effectively, she's going to put these national insurance increases coming from... She's not going to suggest that they're anything associated with the Brexit dividend. She'd say, oh, yeah, but it's due. It's this national insurance contribution, massive one. It's going to be a huge one. It's going to be due. And it's going to be a big part of it, of the next budget.
Well, I mean, I appreciate these are just words, but the Chancellor has ruled that out. A Treasury source said that increasing the rate of income tax or national insurance contributions had been ruled out. So the plan is, the Telegraph's quite strong on this morning, that the thresholds would be frozen after 2020 to help pay for the spending increase, which hinges on the idea that our salaries are going to go up, but the tax rates won't. So, don't laugh, mate. This is our country.
Mate, I've got a second one for you.
Yeah, go on.
And you're an absolute genius on this sort of stuff.
Don't be ridiculous. I'm a carp.
Yeah, this money that's going to the NHS, is it actually going to the NHS or private investment?
Oh, no, don't do that, because that was the one thing where you say it's better to have it going to the NHS than not going to the NHS, even if it... I know. How much of it is going to go to Carillion-type operations that are running kind of ambulance services and blood screening laboratories and whatever? I don't know.
Look at this amazing amount of money that's going to the NHS. Oh, ignore the fact that it might be most of it going to a private company.
Well, it won't be most. I mean, if they need to hire doctors and nurses, that avoids the idea of...
But didn't 85% of last year's private contracts go to private companies?
New ones, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So am I on the ball with this or am I not?
I hate you, mate, because I sort of look for little glimmers of her. I've even rode back from the kind of objective overview of saying that they're just undoing the damage they've done themselves, to say that if you're given a straight choice, we keep it binary, we buy into the zeitgeist, right? Either hang on. Either this money goes to the NHS or it doesn't, and then you bring in all your nuances and observations.
But isn't she like the mate who basically says, oh, let's go down the pub, and then when you go down the pub, oh, you're buying the first round, you're buying the second round, and she's using everyone else's money, or ignore all this other tax cuts and stuff going to really expensive wealthy people. But I'm taking your money.
Yeah, and all right, seeing as you've gone all in on it, I'll tell you what worries me.
Go for it.
It's not just the notion of some of this money making its way into private sector companies, and everyone should Google how many Conservative MPs, and presumably Labour as well, in the Commons and the Lords have got shares in private health companies. I think that when the next narrative comes out, and I don't know if it has yet, what's on the front of the Mail? Yeah, here you go. The front of the Mail is, let's go to war on NHS waste. Now, this I fully accept could be filing me under conspiracy theorist, but usually, and I've read a bit of Chomsky, not as much as I should have done, but this whole notion of defund, demoralise and then privatise, one of the best ways that you soften up the public for the privatisation process is by arguing that because there's no financial imperative for public sector professionals running public sector organisations, in other words, they don't get to keep the money that they save, or they don't get rewarded according to financial measures. The only way that you can cut waste is to privatise it. So they're not saying that yet. What they're saying now, and that is the front of the Mail, as if by magic, let's go to war on NHS waste. Theresa May's speech later today, I predict, will focus on the question of waste, because then the next chapter of that story, and it's a story we've seen many times, is, well, the only way you can bring in efficiencies is by linking performance to finance, and the only way you can really link performance to finance properly is by privatising. So do not be surprised if in the next 6 months or so you're invited to ring radio phone-ins that want you to say that you've still got some crutches that you used 2 years ago and the NHS haven't taken them back, and that's proof that we should definitely privatise the NHS.
You nailed it. Oh, by the way, make sure you clean your hands after touching the Daily Mail.
Oh, well, you say that. was reading it online. 11:11 is the time. You're listening. I wasn't actually, was I? Because it was the front page. 11:11. Nadeem is in Ilford. Nadeem, what's going on?
Hi there. Yeah, I wanted to speak about the caller you had on a few calls back, Ian, who was talking about the Brexit dividend. Your analogy about the car boot sale, I think he didn't understand that.
Don't be mean.
He was arguing that we send 350 million a week to the EU. They send 150 million pounds back that they spend on various EU projects. That means that if we leave the EU, even if we carry on all those projects, we'll still have 200 million pounds that we can do with what we please.
Yes.
He didn't seem to understand that even regardless of whether we carry those projects on, whether we don't carry those projects on, the OBR and everybody else says that the amount of money we will lose, the Treasury, the government will lose from loss of trade, from loss of tax receipts, the cost of setting up other bureaucracies like someone to monitor the standards of pharmaceuticals will far outweigh that £350 million a week.
Yes, but I'm always a little uncomfortable. I know I do it myself, but I don't like taking pot shots at people once they've gone, especially not when they manage to soil themselves live on the programme. It seems like we're adding insult to injury. But people like that have their beliefs, Nadeem. But the beliefs, and it's not fair to ask them to explain their beliefs because they've got their beliefs, and you're a carp.
Well, no, if you just said to him, listen, okay, I understand what you're saying, Ian. We'll have £350 million, but what about...
No, but he doesn't. This is the beauty of being a Brexiter, is that you say that, and you say, where's it currently being spent? What are the things that we shouldn't be spending it on anymore? And he says medical research, and you say, so you think there should be less medical research? And he says, I never said that medical research... Do you see what I mean? If it's a belief, this is the unicornism. If it's a belief...
No, he's focusing on the money that we send to the EU.
You know that, and I know that.
As if that's all of the equation.
But that's a fact. That's a fact. It's not a belief. A belief is very different from a fact, and a belief that the EU is some sort of succubus that it acts against our interests and sucks money out and gives us nothing in return. Once that belief has taken root, there is literally nothing you can do about it.
Well,
literally,
the EU's doing a pretty good job of defending the countries they've got still remaining with them against us.
But that, again, that's not the point, because there are some unspecified drains upon our economy that I am absolutely certain are awful, but cannot name a single one of them, and that's how I know I'm right.
Yeah, the EU sending back £150 million to fund projects, but it must all be projects that are benefiting rich people in the EU.
The vested interest, the kickbacks, mate. There's loads of kickbacks. I can't tell you anyone who gets the kickbacks, except farmers. They voted leave. All right, I can't tell you anyone at all that got the kickbacks, but I definitely know and believe that the kickbacks exist, Nadeem. I mean, with respect, mate, I do this for a living.
Yeah. No, you just need to know. I can't...
You've used that word again. You've used that word, know. It's not about what you know, it's about what you believe.
It's not just Ian, it's the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
Well, no, she does know, but she's playing to people who don't know but do believe, you see.
The membership of the EU is worth nothing. It's not worth anything in trade. When we leave EU, it will have zero impact on the amount of money the UK has.
That's what I believe, you see. You know that's not true, but I believe it is true. And, in this wonderful world of false equivalence and balance, you have to pay as much attention to my beliefs, which I can't back up, and I get really, really cross when it's pointed out that I haven't got a single example to justify my belief. I become quite rude, in fact, but that's not the point, because my belief, for which I have absolutely no evidential support, is worth exactly the same in the context of debate as your knowledge, which is entirely fact-based.
You went on talking about privatisation of the NHS. One of the things that people moan about the NHS in link with the EU is health tourism. Oh, they don't claim back the money from health tourism. Well, what percentage of the NHS budget is spent on treating foreigners who do not deserve...
It doesn't matter, does it? Because
0.3%.
Yeah, but that's a number. That's a number, Nadeem. It's not a belief.
Well, how much money are you going to spend trying to
you're
get
doing it again. You've got a number. You've got some knowledge and some facts. I will sit here and say it's a national health service, not an international health service, and that's worth more than your numbers, you see.
Let's spend 2% of the NHS budget to regain 0.3% of it.
But you're counting again. You're not believing.
You know, it's like, you're going to... you're going to cancel your health insurance because you might not be able to claim from it.
Yes, and that's your dividend.
Cancel your car insurance because
that's your dividend.
And then that's your dividend
Until your house burns down.
Until your house burns down, until you crash your car, or until you get ill.
Should we hug it out?
Yeah. I that's what I signed up to say.
I love you, mate. With your numbers and your facts. Honestly, it's ridiculous. Whatever next. I just want to run something by you, if I may. That comment yesterday from Theresa May that Parliament shouldn't... Is it tie the hands of the government? This is A-level politics, and it's... Oh, man alive. It's 32 years? No, it's not. It's 30 years since... No, it's 28 years. Never get me to do your accounts. It's 28 years since I sat my politics A-level, almost to the day, actually, isn't it? It's almost coming up now, A-levels. And I'm sure that you break it down into the whole point of Parliament is that it's supposed to provide checks and balances for government, isn't it? Isn't that how our constitution works? So when Theresa May said this yesterday, I was slightly troubled. This clip begins with her explaining the vote last week and how she met with the Tory rebels. But listen to it in its entirety.
I did indeed meet a group of my fellow MPs. I listened to their concerns and I undertook to consider their concerns. And the next day I stood up in Prime Minister's questions and said I'd put an amendment down in the House of Lords. I've done exactly that.
Well,
but if I may, what's important about this is that we recognise the concerns that people have about the role of Parliament. But there are two things I'm also very clear about, which is, first of all, that Parliament cannot tie the hands of government in negotiations. If you think about it, as we're sitting there negotiating on the details of our future relationship or our withdrawal agreement, we can't have a situation where every time we have to take a decision, we have to go back and have a lengthy debate. And, Parliament can't tie government's hands in negotiations. But it's also important that Parliament cannot and should not overturn the will of the British people, which was to leave the EU.
I've only done this once before. I did it with Amber Rudd when she was trying to get employers to publish lists of their foreign employees. I don't know, should I do it again today? Can we clip it again? Just get rid of the bit at the top to keep it short. Just go straight to the 2 points. Do you see what I mean? I don't care about her meeting with the other MPs. Because this is a speech that was given on the 28th of December 1933 to representatives of the international press. It says, the nation and the government are one thing. The will of the people is the will of the government and vice versa. The modern structure of the German state is a higher form of democracy in which, by virtue of the people's mandate, the government is exercised authoritatively, while there is no possibility for parliamentary interference to obliterate and render ineffective the execution of the nation's will. I am more than happy for you to pull my pants down on this one and call me Charlie. But listen to Theresa May yesterday.
But there are two things I'm also very clear about, which is, first of all, that Parliament cannot tie the hands of government in negotiations. If you think about it, as we're sitting there negotiating on the details of our future relationship or our withdrawal agreement, we can't have a situation where every time we have to take a decision, we have to go back and have a lengthy debate. And, Parliament can't tie government's hands in negotiations. But it's also important that Parliament cannot and should not overturn the will of the British people, which was to leave the EU.
And this is Joseph Goebbels in 1933. The nation and the government in Germany are one thing. The will of the people is the will of the government and vice versa. The modern structure of the German state is a higher form of democracy in which, by virtue of the people's mandate, the government is exercised authoritatively, while there is no possibility for parliamentary interference to obliterate and render ineffective the execution of the nation's will. I'm just going to put that out there. I'm not going to comment on it, because I'm conscious of what Godwin's law is, and I know how lazy and silly it is. That's why I've only ever done it once before, with that speech of Amber Rudd's that could have been lifted straight from the pages of Mein Kampf. But that is Joseph Goebbels describing the will of the people and why Parliament should not be able to tie the hands of a government. I'm just going to leave it for your cogitation. We may return to it later in the week. And if you would like to completely poo-poo me, then you know how to, okay? You know how to. You get in touch in all the usual ways and point out that either I've got my history wrong or my comparisons wrong or my understanding of those two positions. Because I was slightly scared yesterday when I heard a Prime Minister say that Parliament shouldn't be in any way seeking to stay the hand of a government. And then that phrase, will of the people, which we all know is meaningless. And then someone sent me that little snippet from a speech to the international press at Geneva on December the 28th, 1933. If you want a source for it, it's the German League of Nations Union News Service. 25 minutes after 11 is the time. Going to change, I think we'll change that completely now, don't you? I'm slightly unnerved by that, actually. I'm sure, in fact, email me and I will read it out about why I'm barking up entirely the wrong tree on that one, because I just saw some echoes, that's all I'd say.